This time, the response came instantaneously, a stream of dancing lights, for all the world like the shimmering curtains of the aurora blazed across the stream. They took up patterns that were held for a moment only to break apart and form again in different shapes or different colours. They looped, they swayed, they sprayed apart. They burst into showers of radiance that suddenly swerved this way or that, like a flock of birds changing direction in the sky. And as Lyra watched, she felt the same sense, as of trembling on the brink of understanding, that she remembered from the time when she was beginning to read the alethiometer. I'm pretty sure there's one person, at least in the audience, who might remember where that's from. But if anyone wanted to shout it out, I'd be perfectly happy. It's from the moment in the second book of the trilogy where we're looking at the computer screen in Mary Malone's office. So this is the moment where dust goes digital, if you like. And although I'm not going to be discussing adaptations of Pullman's work in that sense, I wanted to use this idea of his appreciation of technological skill and of different types of media that function across time, across place, and across discipline. So this is where the elementary particles of Lyra's world touch the pixels of a computer screen. And to identify that embrace of a digital interface within his dark materials is to turn attention to a really remarkable chapter, I think, chapter 4 of The Subtle Knife, Trepanning. It's a very carefully plotted and a very carefully paced chapter. It tells us of Will and Lyra's experiences on a day in Oxford, when Will is seeking information relating to his father's disappearance, and Lyra is looking for a scholar who can explain to her some more about dust. I think it's close to our hearts if we're enjoying the novels. It's literally close to us geographically while we sit here today, because the scholar that Lyra finds, Mary Malone, is situated on South Parks Road, somewhere in the science block. And it's not just that. The connections between worlds and universes will take us even closer to our current location, because this chapter, Trepanning, will move us through the centre of Oxford and take us quite literally into the Natural History Museum and track us through into the back of this museum, into the slightly more dusty space of the Pitt Rivers. So this chapter is integral, I think, to the ways in which the connection of worlds and of universes and of ways of seeing are so significant to the development across the trilogy. It's weaving plot lines and thematic threads of likeness and of difference. It's playing with ways of defamiliarizing contexts and behavioral norms. So we can compare and contrast the experience of Will and Lyra in an Oxford which belongs to one of them but not the other. We can compare and contrast the viewpoints of Lyra and Mary from different worlds, but also somebody who uses a vocabulary that might sound moral or religious, talking of good and evil, and somebody who wishes to talk about science. We can compare and contrast the locations of a museum and a science laboratory. We can think about dust, or we can think about physics. We can think about the old, we can think about the new. We can think about then, we can think about now, we can think about there, we can think about here. But what we think we probably, as readers, delight in most in this particular chapter is Lyra's evaluation of what she finds in the museum. So she walks through the natural history section of this particular museum and is then found in this quieter space of the Pitt Rivers, which is a museum, as you probably know, of man-made things, of man-made objects. And we delight, I think, in Lyra's slightly ambivalent evaluation of the museum exhibit of Arctic artifacts. And we do so partly because of our shared knowledge as readers of the Svalbard experiences and adventures from the first book. So there we have this rather pert young character looking at the museum exhibit. Well, how strange! Those caribou skin furs were exactly the same as hers. but they tied the traces on that sledge completely wrong. So we've been brought to this museum space, but we're being asked to encounter these particular physical objects in a new way, to see them as objects of use, not simply as things that will gather dust behind glass, but rather things that will attract dust with a capital D, because we are either using them, thinking about them, engaging with them. So the Pitt Rivers, which begins as something of a treasure trove, I think, on your first experience of that particular space, a cabinet of curiosities, if you like, is now being seen via Lyra and via our reading experience of her Arctic adventures as a way of re-evaluating that kind of display. We are beginning to use the collection, if you like. And this is a very playful thing, because I think we can, to some extent, assume that one of the things that the author did while he was looking around in that magpie way for raw materials to employ within his own text might well have been to stumble into the Pitt Rivers Museum and have a very good look at its rifle selection for Lee Scoresby, and have a very good look at what it was doing and saying, both about skulls and about Arctic exhibits. And the way in which we then find that in Lyra's world, which is the authorial world, we tie knots and we tie the strips together differently from the way that it is found in the museum exhibit, where we potentially might find the start of one of the storylines that takes us into the wonderland of his dark materials, is another way in which we are using material and reusing material and resourcing objects of use. And of course, the Pitt River Museum is not simply a space for treasure trove curiosity. It's an active, educative space for the study of anthropology, for the study of humanity and of our story. So to bring Lyra to this space, and with her to bring the reader to this space, is offering us an exceptionally rich interface with a number of different communicative moments. So the study of humanity, of our evolution as a species, but also of our relation with the material world over time and locale, happening in this particular chapter, trepanning. Trepanation, the practice of making a hole in the skull to improve brain pulsations. And yes, I did take that off the web. Could be done for your health, or could be done, as the shaman in this particular set of novels is said to have done it, for spiritual reason, to bring the gods in. So we have in this chapter, trepanning, the move from this location, from the Pitt Rivers here, to the science labs on South Parks Road. And within the plot lines, or if you like, the props almost, of this particular chapter, we move from the fascination that Lyra has with the trepanned skull, and the way in which she gives that so much of her attention to try to work out the dating, the age of that particular skull, and the dust that is attracted to it, against the fact that she's not seeing the current danger. Sir Charles Latham, who's kind of coming in and watching her, kind of voyeur, one of many moments when we might be thinking about Paradise Lost and a kind of satanic figure looking on at innocence. But it's not just that we have that particular prop of the trepanned skull. We watch with Lyra as she moves into the science area, where her cranium will be linked up to a computer through pressure pads that are being placed upon her skull. So we very much have this sense across time and this sense across humanity of using different methods of communication, different methods of opening up doorways to the spirit world, or doorways to other means of expanding thought, experience, human consciousness, human knowledge. And of course, both this trepanned skull and this moment when Mary can hook Lyra up to the computer, and she will make the pixels dance, dust will respond to her brainwaves. They both require certain types of technical skill, and I think this is something that Pullman is very engaged with and very, very good at doing, the practical side to art. And when I'm using the word technology, I am thinking of it as a type of art form. You need tools to do prana skull. You need tools to write code to run a computer program. You need tools to design and to craft and a lithiometer. And it seems to me that this particular author loves to introduce that materiality, that tactility of a crafted object of use. So something that, again, is not left behind the glass screen of the museum to gather dust, but something which is in your hands, attracting, capital D, dust. And that, as part of an anthropological exercise, seems a major part of what's going on in these particular novels. And I guess what I'd like to do is sort of just push that idea a little bit further and talk a little bit about the way in which that making and shaping and making an object of use. And of course, Mary Malone using the lens and working with that to make the amber spyglass is going to be the most obvious example from within the novels. I guess I want to push that just a little bit further and think a little bit about authorship. Think a little bit about the making as a process. The way that that's put within the novels, so making becomes part of the plot lines of these novels, of making and of mending and of resourcing materials. Something to do with our cultural memory and inheritance there. But what happens when we actually take that to the idea of authorship as making and as memory? And in that activity, we might think of maturation as being part of the process. Of course, we're thinking about that with these novels. They're novels of adolescence. They're novels of growing up in much the same way as Alice in Wonderland might be said to be. But I think I would want to think about also the reader's relationship to the book and whether there's a maturation process within that or whether one could be developed. And whether also there might potentially be a maturation of the author's relationship to his books. The 3 novels of his Dark Materials are published for the first time between 1995 and the year 2000. But in 2007, a new edition comes out of his Dark Materials, which includes for the first time new extra sections, lantern slides, little snippets of text on one page. Specifically, Pullman says that this is not a rewrite of his own work. It's not an adaptation of it. It's simply an opportunity to play. And what he's doing is finger-posting ways into the ways in which other stories might just stay within the printed text. He's filling in some gaps, but he's also intensifying our curiosity about others. These are snapshots, these are photograms, these are freeze frames, but we know that all we have to do is hit that pause button one more time to make it play. That kind of sense of using a technology that might begin with early ideas about photography, might begin with magic lanterns, might begin with lantern slides, and lead us right the way through to some of the things that my colleagues have been showing you earlier on this evening. So what's happening with lantern slides is not just encouraging you to buy another edition of the novels, it's also encouraging the curious. And it's something which is playful, and actually it's something which is relaxed in that way in which we're so encouraged within these novels to relax into communication. But it's also, I think, potentially offering us new ways of insight into what's going on in the novels. And my apologies at this point for not showing you, deliberately not showing you, a digital image. But I want to take you with me, if I can, into these lantern slides as a visual as well as a piece of text. So when you're in the 2007 edition, there's really rather a handsome, decorative little illustration in pen and ink of what the magic lantern might look like. And we follow that up with Pullman's own text, talking about why he's introduced the lantern slides. As for why I called these little pieces lantern slides, it's because I remember the wooden boxes my grandfather used to have, each one packed neatly with painted glass slides showing scenes from Bible stories or fairy tales. From time to time, he would get out the heavy old magic lantern and project some of these pictures onto a screen. And we would sit in the darkened room with the smell of hot metal and watch one scene succeeding another, trying to make sense of the narrative. and wondering what St. Paul was doing in the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Because they never came out of the box in quite the right order. I think it was my grandfather's magic lantern that Lord Asriel used in the second chapter of Northern Lights. And the crafting of that is, I think, majestic and magnificent. The way in which it honours the past and uses the present to gesture us back to materials that we know already from the texts, and plays with this question of likeness and similarity against things which have become defamiliarised, and offers to a generation like ourselves a nostalgic memory of past technologies. And it is quite pristine, isn't it, that idea of actually the weight of the magic lantern and the smell of the hot metal and the colours that would be up on the screen. And the idea that it is familial, the idea that it is communal, the idea that we are together in this activity is definitely part of the way that little paragraph opens up memory, which is both individual for the author and also shared within the community that can hear that on a day like today. So this idea also of suggesting that these lantern slides, which give us more information, give us extras, give us the extra clips, also pull us back right to the beginning of a story that we know, right to the beginning of his Dark Materials, to the second chapter of Northern Lights. That's what I'm interested in and what I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes talking to you about. When we're in that chapter, we find our first trepanned skull, so it is actually also a way in which we're moving around in terms of what we've been thinking about today. It's a very important chapter, as I'm sure you know. It's where we set up an awful lot of the activity of the plot lines of the novels. But when Lord Asriel is showing these particular slides to the scholars in Jordan College, two things are important. One is the man-made manipulation of technologies and of scientific explorations. So we need the filter in order to be able to see dust on these slides. And the novel explains to us that a special emulsion has been tested, and this is the first time that it's working, in order to let us see differently, to let us see anew. And we also, in that particular early chapter, have it very clearly mapped out to us that there are also political strategies being played out between the members of this community. So we can think about the ways in which that also is a set of strategies and a set of manipulations. The slides themselves show us dust settling on the adult, and then they go on to show us this remarkable opportunity that sets the quest for the trilogy, if you like, of the city in the stars, of the city from another world. And that's what we are told that can be seen on the final slide. But I'd like you to be curious, and I'd like you to go back to your copies of his Dark Materials, or indeed just to Blackwell's and have a quick flick through, and see what we actually see in that chapter. And what you see at the opening of that chapter is a little image actually produced by the author himself. You can discover the page through using the 2007 lantern slides to take you back to re-experience or experience for the first time, if you've been flicking through in a non-linear fashion, this second chapter of Northern Lights, where the story opens with a little image of a slightly more unpolished, artisanal, if you like, sketch of a magic lantern. And what it's doing is showing you the hand turning it on. And that's remarkable, isn't it? The man-made quality. And suddenly the light is opening out. And then this tiny little box-framed thumb sketch, that's what you're seeing, the light from the magic lantern. So you're seeing something that is illuminating the story, illuminating the page, and something that in 2007 we might have a little bit more information as to why this might be personal for the author himself, that it might be reminding him of his own past childhood. But we know now about shadow particles. We know that that's what Mary Malone calls dust. And if we think now about the way in which this picture, this illustration works in the second chapter of Northern Lights, this idea of the magic lantern that can illuminate or light up the page. But what do you do when you do that on a page, not on a screen? You light up text. You light up print. The text is dark. We see it better because of this light. But hang on, that's the blank page that's actually foregrounding the ink, foregrounding the darkness. So we have this little black and white illustration where it's boxed in. It looks like it's therefore gaining kind of perspectival depth. So we think it's from another space, and it's opening up, illuminating this space, ink on a blank white page. The magic lantern in ink becoming the light source, if you like. Something composed blank becoming history. The same idea of the photographic negative of what is white reversing to what is black. Because presumably this idea of breaking through with light and breaking through with blackness, which we will then fill with black text, is this same thing of similarity and difference, this same of breaking through with a window, a trepanning, a new breaking of the frame. And ultimately, of course, what is so delightful is that the ink hasn't given you light. What the ink has done is put one line going upwards and one line going downwards, so that you have the kind of the cone or the arc. So as you read in from here, the light goes this way to illuminate the page, but it actually just has one line of blackness there and one line of blackness there. It's like two storylines or multiple storylines that look like they're going apart. Ultimately, of course, they may well conjoin at some point in time in the text, if not in his Dark Materials itself, at least in one of the lantern slides, where Pullman talks about this idea about the way that the storylines go apart, but will come together to touch at some point in time. He's broken the frame, he's broken the division, he's done it right from the beginning of his storytelling in this novel. For what is the use of a book without pictures, we might ask ourselves. But please, I would ask you, go back and have another look at Pullman's own illustrations in Book 1 and indeed in Book 2 of his Dark Materials, and see what you think. See the way in which in this particular chapter he's suggesting that technology will assist vision and also will help the storyteller to tell the tale, that idea of the hand again that's going to turn on this illumination. And a vision, if you like, not necessarily of a city in the sky, but of a quest narrative that can last all time. An imaginative stimulus. Dark Materials, indeed. Thank you.